My company fired me at 1:47 a.m. while I was fixing a critical server failure. No thank you, no notice. Just a PDF that said, your position has been eliminated. My name is Marcus, I'm 51 years old, and I've been keeping computers running since before most people knew what the internet was. Senior Systems Administrator at Meridian Financial Services, managing infrastructure for 2,400 employees across 12 offices. 23 years with the company, the last 8 as the sole person who actually understood how everything connected. The email came from Brad Hutchinson, our new VP of Operations. Harvard MBA, 28 years old, hired 6 months ago to optimize operational efficiency. The subject line read, Personnel Restructuring Immediate Effect. 3 paragraphs of corporate speak that boiled down to, we're replacing you with 2 junior developers at half your salary. Your final paycheck will reflect appropriate severance. Please return all company property by end of business Friday. I read it twice while server alerts were still flashing red on my monitoring dashboard. The primary database cluster had started cascading failures at 1:23 a.m. I'd been wrestling with it for 24 minutes when Brad decided my $127,000 salary was too expensive. The thing about enterprise systems is they're like vintage cars. Sure, anyone can drive them when they're running smooth. But when something breaks at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, you need someone who knows which wire connects to what, who remembers why that one server has a custom configuration from 2018, who understands the delicate balance of patches and workarounds that keep everything functional. Meridian's infrastructure was my life's work. Not just the servers and networking equipment, but the institutional knowledge. The documentation that existed only in my head. The passwords stored in encrypted files on my personal drives. The backup procedures that required manual intervention at 3 specific points because the automated system had quirks that would cost $80,000 to fix properly. I'd been warning management about technical debt for years. Every budget meeting, I'd explain why we needed to invest in proper redundancy, why the legacy systems required specialized maintenance, why cutting IT staff was penny-wise and pound-foolish. The previous VP, Jim Morrison, understood this. He'd been with the company 15 years, worked his way up from account manager. He knew that infrastructure wasn't just an expense line item. Then Jim retired, and Brad arrived with his spreadsheets and efficiency metrics. First thing he did was audit all departmental expenses. It was his biggest target. We're spending too much on personnel, he announced in his first all-hands meeting. I've identified significant optimization opportunities. Over the next 6 months, Brad systematically dismantled institutional knowledge. He pushed out Helen from accounting, who'd been processing payroll for 18 years. He eliminated the entire customer service training program, replacing it with a wiki page. He outsourced facilities management to a company that had never worked with our building's custom HVAC system, but IT was his crown jewel. We can get 2 junior developers for what we're paying 1 senior admin, he explained to the board. Modern systems are designed to be user-friendly. We don't need someone with decades of legacy experience. What Brad didn't understand was that I'd built redundancy into everything. Not just technical redundancy, but knowledge redundancy. I was the single point of failure for hundreds of critical processes. Not because I was a control freak, but because I'd never been given budget to properly document and cross-train. Every time I requested additional senior staff, I was told it wasn't cost-effective, so I adapted. I became indispensable the only way I could, by being the only person who knew how things actually worked. The database cluster stabilized at 2:15 a.m. I'd manually rerouted traffic through the backup systems, cleared the corrupted cache files, and restarted the primary nodes in the correct sequence. Standard procedure for this particular failure mode, which happened every few months when the garbage collection process hit a memory leak in the third-party monitoring software. I sent Brad a brief status report. Database cluster restored. Root cause identified. Implementing permanent fix. Then I started thinking about what came next. My severance package included a standard non-compete clause and intellectual property agreement. I couldn't work for competitors for 12 months, and anything I developed while employed belonged to Meridian. Pretty standard stuff, except for one important detail. The company's intellectual property was stored in systems that I'd personally configured and maintained. I'd always been paranoid about security. Call it occupational hazard. Over the years, I'd implemented layers of access controls, encrypted file systems, and authentication protocols that went far beyond industry standards. The company never complained because we'd never had a security breach, never lost customer data, never failed a compliance audit. What they didn't realize was that I'd structured everything around my own access patterns. Not maliciously, just efficiently. When you're the only person managing infrastructure, you design workflows that make your job easier. You create shortcuts, automate repetitive tasks, and build systems that work the way you think. Every major system at Meridian required multiple authentication factors that were tied to my personal accounts. The backup systems needed specific SSH keys that I'd generated on my personal hardware. The disaster recovery procedures required manual steps that I'd never fully documented because I'd never needed to teach them to anyone else. I spent the next 3 hours doing exactly what any competent professional would do. I followed company policy. I began the process of transitioning my responsibilities to my replacements. The first step was documenting current system status. I created a comprehensive handover report that detailed every active server, every scheduled maintenance window, every known issue that required monitoring. 47 pages of technical specifications, complete with network diagrams and configuration details. The second step was securing company assets. I changed all administrative passwords to randomly generated strings and stored them in the company's password management system. I updated access controls to remove my personal accounts and created new administrative accounts for my replacements. I documented every custom script, every automated process, every manual procedure that kept the infrastructure running. The third step was ensuring business continuity. I prepared detailed instructions for common maintenance tasks, emergency procedures, and troubleshooting guides. I created user accounts for the new junior developers and scheduled training sessions to walk them through critical processes. Everything was professional, thorough, and completely useless. The problem with complex systems is that documentation can only capture explicit knowledge. It can't capture the intuitive understanding that comes from years of experience. It can't explain why certain configurations work, even though they violate best practices. It can't convey the subtle signs that indicate when something is about to fail. The password management system I'd set up was military-grade secure. Two-factor authentication, encrypted storage, audit logging, the works. It would take a court order and 3 weeks to crack if someone lost access to the primary administrative account. The new administrative accounts I'd created had full theoretical access to everything. They could log into any server, modify any configuration, restart any service. What they couldn't do was understand the implications of their actions. The training documentation I'd prepared was comprehensive and accurate. Every procedure was explained step by step, every command was documented with examples, every troubleshooting scenario was mapped out in detail. It would take approximately 6 months of full-time study to absorb all the information. By 5:30 a.m., I'd completed the transition process. I sent Brad a final status report. Handover documentation complete. New administrative accounts configured. All systems stable. Good luck. Then I went home, poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 25, and waited for the show to begin. The first call came at 9:15 a.m. Jessica from HR, very apologetic. Marcus, I'm so sorry to bother you after yesterday's situation, but we're having some technical difficulties. The new ET team is having trouble accessing the email servers. Could you possibly help us out? I was polite but firm. I'm no longer employed by Meridian, Jessica. All system access was properly transitioned to the new team. They should have everything they need. I understand, but they're saying some of the passwords aren't working? That's impossible. I followed standard security protocols. All passwords were updated and stored in the company password management system. Your new team should contact their supervisor if they're having access issues. The second call came at 10:45 a.m. Brad himself trying to sound casual. Marcus, hey, quick question. The new guys are having trouble with some of the documentation you left. Could you hop on a call and walk them through a few things? I'm afraid I can't do that, Brad. My employment was terminated effective immediately, remember? Any consulting work would need to go through proper channels with appropriate contracts and hourly rates. Come on, Marcus, don't be like that. We're all professionals here. Absolutely. Which is why I completed a comprehensive handover before my departure. Everything your team needs is documented. If they need additional support, I'm available for consulting at $250 per hour. Minimum 4-hour engagement. The third call came at 1:30 p.m. This time it was Rachel from accounting, sounding panicked. Marcus, we can't process payroll. The system is saying there's a database error, and the new IT guys don't know how to fix it. That's unfortunate, Rachel. You might want to escalate to Brad. This sounds like it requires immediate professional attention. By 3 p.m., I was getting calls every 20 minutes. The email servers were intermittently dropping connections. The customer database was throwing random errors. The backup systems were showing amber warnings that nobody understood. The phone system was routing calls to disconnected extensions. Each problem was minor by itself, nothing that would cause immediate catastrophic failure. Just the kind of gradual degradation that happens when complex systems lose their primary caretaker. I spent the afternoon researching job opportunities. The market for senior systems administrators was excellent, especially for someone with my experience in financial services. I had 3 interviews lined up by the end of the week. The fourth call came at 4:45 p.m. Brad again, no longer trying to sound casual. "Marcus, we need you to come in. There's some kind of cascade failure happening, and the new team is overwhelmed." "I'm sorry to hear that, Brad. Have you considered contacting a professional IT services company? There are several in the area that specialize in emergency response." "This is ridiculous. You're being vindictive." "I am being professional. You terminated my employment without notice while I was actively working to resolve a critical issue. I completed a thorough handover of all responsibilities. If your new team is having difficulties, that's a management issue, not a technical one." The fifth call came at 6:20 p.m. This time it was CEO Patricia Williams herself. "Marcus, I need you to come in immediately. We're looking at a potential system-wide failure. I appreciate the call, Miss Williams, but I'm no longer employed by Meridian. If you need emergency IT support, I'm available for consulting at $500 per hour, minimum 8-hour engagement, payment in advance." $500? That's outrageous. That's my emergency rate. Standard consulting is $250 per hour. But given the urgency of your situation and the fact that I'd be working outside normal business hours, emergency rates apply. There was a long pause. "Fine, can you be here in an hour?" "I'll need a signed consulting agreement and payment authorization before I can begin work." "My attorney can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning? Marcus, we need help now." "I understand. Unfortunately, I'm not available for emergency work without proper contracts in place. Liability issues, you understand." The call stopped after that. I assumed they'd found alternative solutions, or at least alternative consultants. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 unread emails. The local news was running a story about Meridian Financial Services experiencing technical difficulties that had prevented customers from accessing their accounts. The stock price had dropped 12% in after-hours trading. I made coffee and read through the emails. Most were from panicked employees, a few were from reporters, and one was from Brad's personal attorney, demanding that I cease and desist from any actions that might be construing as sabotage. I called my own attorney, Rebecca Chen, who'd handled my contract negotiations for years. "Becca, I need you to review a situation for me." "Let me guess. Your former employer is having technical difficulties?" "How did you know?" "Because you're the third call I've gotten this morning about Meridian. They're claiming you sabotaged their systems after being terminated." "That's interesting. What's your professional opinion?" "Based on what I know about your work history and professional standards, I think they fired the only person who knew how to keep their systems running, and now they're facing the consequences of that decision." "That's my assessment as well." "Marcus, I need to ask this directly. Did you do anything that could be construed as sabotage?" "I followed standard IT security protocols. I changed all administrative passwords, secured all system access, and provided comprehensive documentation of all processes and procedures. Everything was done according to company policy." "And the systems are failing because?" "Because maintaining complex infrastructure requires institutional knowledge that can't be captured in documentation. They terminated the person who had that knowledge and expected 2 junior developers to immediately replace decades of experience." "That's what I thought. Let me draft a response to their attorney. If they want to pursue this, we'll be happy to demonstrate that you acted professionally and ethically throughout the transition process." The story made the national technology news that afternoon. "Financial services firm cripples own IT infrastructure with layoffs" was the headline on TechCrunch. The article quoted several industry experts who described the situation as a textbook example of how not to manage IT transitions. Within 48 hours, I had job offers from 3 different companies. The most interesting came from Meridian's largest competitor, who was apparently very interested in hiring someone with intimate knowledge of financial services infrastructure. I accepted a position as principal systems architect at Blackstone Financial, with a salary of $165,000 plus equity and a signing bonus that covered 6 months of living expenses. My first project was designing a disaster recovery system that could handle exactly the kind of cascade failures that had brought down Meridian. The final chapter of this story came 3 months later, when I received a call from Patricia Williams. Marcus, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to reach out about a potential opportunity. I'm doing very well, thank you. How can I help you? We're rebuilding our IT infrastructure from the ground up. We've learned some hard lessons about the importance of experienced personnel. I'd like to offer you a position as Director of IT Operations with a significant salary increase and full budget authority to build the team you think we need. That's very flattering, Patricia. What kind of salary range are we discussing? $200,000 base plus performance bonuses and equity options. I appreciate the offer, but I'm very happy in my current position. Besides, I think the non-compete clause from my previous employment would prevent me from returning to Meridian. Actually, our legal team has determined that the non-compete was voided when we terminated you without cause. We're prepared to offer $250,000 if that would change your mind. Patricia, I need to be honest with you. Even if I were interested in returning, which I'm not, I couldn't recommend it. The infrastructure damage from the past few months would take at least 2 years to fully repair. The regulatory compliance issues alone would be a nightmare, and frankly, the reputation damage in the industry would make it very difficult to hire qualified staff. So you're saying the situation is hopeless? I'm saying the situation is what it is. You made a decision to prioritize short-term cost savings over long-term operational stability. The consequences of that decision are playing out exactly as any experienced IT professional would have predicted. What happened to Brad, by the way? Brad resigned 6 weeks ago. He's pursuing other opportunities. I'm sure he is. Well, Patricia, I wish you the best of luck with your rebuild. If you need recommendations for consulting firms that specialize in disaster recovery, I'd be happy to provide some names. Thank you, Marcus. I suppose we deserve this. You deserve what you built. The good news is that infrastructure problems are solvable given enough time and money. The bad news is that institutional knowledge once lost is very difficult to replace. I hung up and went back to my current project, designing a system that could handle the kind of load that would probably crash Meridian's rebuilt infrastructure for at least another year. The thing about being a professional is that you take pride in building things that work. You document everything you can, you train people when you get the chance, and you always try to leave things better than you found them. But sometimes the most professional thing you can do is let people learn from their own mistakes. Some lessons can only be taught by experience, and some organizations can only learn through failure. I didn't sabotage Meridian systems. I didn't need to. I just stopped being the person who prevented them from failing. And sometimes that's enough. Subscribe if you agree.